In this video, we are covering the summary of chapters 20 through 25. So this is part 3, the final part of the novel Things Fall Apart. So we are wrapping up our reading of the novel with this summary video. As you follow along, make sure you are jotting down some notes on your note catcher. Remember, you do not need to write down every single thing that's on the screen. It's just the most important things. Write shorthand. Just notes. These are notes for yourself. So at the end of part 2, Okonkwo is finishing up his 7 years of exile, and he is coming up with plans for how to return back to Amofia. And he is thinking about when he returns, he wants to regain those wasted years. So rather than being able to build up his wealth and gain more titles and increase his status, he was away in Mbanta during his exile, and now upon his return he wants to build a bigger compound, he wants to get some new wives, and he wants to start getting titles for his sons. Remember, in part 2 of the novel, Nwoye has converted to Christianity and has effectively completely broken the relationship between himself and Okonkwo. Okonkwo calls Nwoye a woman, but vows to raise his other sons as men. So that relationship is broken. During the exile, Azinma has grown into a beautiful young woman, and Okonkwo convinces her to wait until they get back to Amofia to take a husband. So once they return, that is part of his plan, is to find a husband for Azinma. When Okonkwo returns to Amofia, he finds that it has changed dramatically. So in part 2, it was only really the unsuccessful, untitled, not well-respected men who have converted to Christianity. It's people who are kind of on the fringes of society. They don't really fit in the community anyway, and they find that solace within the new Christian church. But now when Okonkwo returns toward the end of part 2, more respected and titled men have converted to Christianity, which is, of course, a shock to Okonkwo. There's also a new courthouse that has been built, along with a new justice system. Think back to what we remember in part 1 about the justice system with the Igbo. It's more tied to their spirituality. They use the Agwugwu to represent the ancestral spirits who dole out the punishment. They hear the cases and then decide what to do as a result. Like when we looked at the tradition, when the man brought the charges that his in-laws had kidnapped his wife. Now there's the new justice system, just like what the justice system is like in Europe at the time, where it's more formal. There's a prison, there's a judge who hears cases and then doles out the punishment, similar to what we have now. There are also messengers or guards who guard the prison, and they mistreat the prisoners there. Most of the people who are imprisoned or arrested are because they have offended the white men in some way. A lot of the times it is just the Igbo people following what their traditions have been. For example, with the idea that twins are an abomination and leaving them in the evil forest, the Europeans, of course, see that as murder. And so we see this clash between the beliefs and the structures between the two cultures. Also in chapter 20, Okonkwo sees that people are starting to convert to Christianity and leaving the culture behind, and he asks Obiarika, why aren't people fighting back? Why are we allowing this? And Obiarika reminds him of what happened with the Abame and says that it's too late. It's how are we going to fight against our brothers if other Igbo have converted to Christianity? He mentions that the Christians came in a very clever way, in a quiet and peaceful way, and now it's gone too far. We can't fight back now. They've infiltrated too much. And then he says that we have fallen apart. So we see that mention of the title, that things have fallen apart. Moving on to chapter 21, the key things from chapter 21 are just on this screen. So along with the infiltration of the colonizers and like the destruction of the Igbo culture, there are some positive things. One of which is the addition of this trading store, which is kind of like a grocery store, hardware store, where people can buy and sell things. So the people are happy that it's a little bit easier to get some goods, and also they're happy with the amount of money that it brings in. We're introduced to this new character named Mr. Brown, who's a missionary that works with the Christian church. He's a very patient man. He spends time with the clan's leaders, and they are able to converse about their differing beliefs in a really like tolerant and peaceful way that a lot of the other missionaries are not able to. And Mr. Brown really embodies or symbolizes this colonist paradox where there is some positive change, like with the trading store, and then we know from history, like the addition of medicine and technological practices. But at the same time, there is a devastating loss of culture, and that's what Mr. Brown represents. In chapter 22, Mr. Brown leaves and is replaced by another missionary named Mr. Smith, where Mr. Brown was very tolerant and kind to the clan. Mr. Smith is very strict. He believes that everyone should follow the Christian teachings like to a T. The narrator mentions that Mr. Smith sees issues as black or white, and there's no gray area. So that metaphor of there being things that are black or white and there's gray area, we use to describe like what we believe is staunchly right or wrong, and then the gray is kind of what is left up for debate. Novel, this is representative of Mr. Smith seeing what the Igbo, the black people, value as wrong and what the white Christians believe is right. There is a clansman who is converted to Christianity named Enoch, who is overzealous, meaning he like very strictly follows the Christian teachings and is like exuberant about it. He unmasks a man during an Agwugwu ceremony, which is, not something that is acceptable because they're representing the ancestral spirits. And in response, the Agwugwu destroy Enoch's compound. So Enoch flees to hide with Mr. Smith, and the Agwugwu arrive at the church to find Enoch, to like exact their revenge. And the villagers state that they won't hurt Mr. Smith because they respected Mr. Brown so much, but they destroy the church as a way to combat this, this disrespect from Enoch and the church. That's it for chapter 22. Moving on to 23. So Okonkwo has this renewed, rejuvenated spirit. He's happy for the first time now that the clansmen have taken some power back. The district commissioner's messengers arrive at the village and invite Okonkwo and 5 other leaders to visit the district commissioner to kind of talk things out. It ends up that the men are tricked and they're arrested. The clansmen try to explain why they destroyed the church and say, like, we did this as a way to say that what was done against the Agwugwu was wrong, like a part of our culture, we've been disrespected. But the commissioner interrupts and just completely disregards what they believe and what they value. The 6 men are imprisoned. They're lectured about what is right and wrong. They're given a hefty fine to pay as their punishment, and they're tortured. In chapter 23, we see the district commissioner and the messengers disrespect the clansmen. So they have tricked the clansmen. They refuse to listen and try to understand their point of view, their perspective about their culture. They whip and starve the clansmen. They shave their heads as a way to strip them of their dignity, and they inflate the fine so they can steal. So in addition to the fine amount that's going to be paid to the court, they request additional money so that the messengers can skim off the top. And the characters in the novel see a divide in the two cultures that's not going to be reconciled. So it's this point where the clansmen see that the Christians, that the district commissioner, the colonizers are not reasonable and are not willing to respect their culture, and they decide that there has to be something to do about it. The district commissioner goes and tells the villagers about the fine, and the villagers agree to pay the fine in order to appease the white men and create peace rather than fighting back, which is another part of the turning point in that the 6 men who were imprisoned see that the villagers are not rallying behind them. In chapter 24, the 6 prisoners are allowed to go back home. Of course, they feel humiliated. Their heads have been shaved. They've been whipped, and other people are able to see these physical reminders of the abuse that they endured. When they return to the village, they're expected to be welcomed with open arms and have people rally behind them, but it seems like the villagers just move out of their way and hardly take notice. Okonkwo's male family and friends gather at his hut, but Obiarika is the only one to speak to him, and they notice the whip marks on his back. There is a town crier who announces that a meeting is going to be held the following day. A town crier is a person who literally cries out and gives announcements. So because they didn't have phones or another way to communicate, the crier goes from village to village giving this announcement. Okonkwo decides that if Amofia decides to fight, he will join. And if they do not decide to fight, then he will resolve to avenge himself alone. There are members from all 9 villages who join the meeting, so it seems like there's going to be a good gathering. They're all going to decide as one, like what to do and how to move forward. One of the men that was imprisoned with Okonkwo tries to rally the villagers and say, like, it's come to a point where we cannot refuse to fight any longer, even if we're fighting against our own brothers and other clansmen. During the meeting, court messengers arrive and try to interrupt the meeting to disperse the people and keep them from creating a plan to fight back. In response, Okonkwo beheads the messenger. Like, he just straight up kills the guy. Okonkwo expects other villagers to rally behind him and start this war against the Christians, but no one follows. And instead, they let the remaining messengers leave. It's at this point that Okonkwo knows that they are not going to go to war. Before beginning our discussion of the last chapter, I do want to give this trigger warning. There is a mention of suicide. I don't go into any detail about it, but there is someone who dies by suicide, so I wanted you to be aware of that before continuing. At the beginning of chapter 25, the district commissioner and his soldiers arrive at Okonkwo's compound and ask to speak to him after Okonkwo kills the messenger. Obiarika says that Okonkwo isn't there. So in response, the district commissioner threatens to have everyone arrested if they refuse to take them to see Okonkwo. Obiarika then agrees to take the men to see Okonkwo, where they take the men to see Okonkwo. He is hanging from a tree where he has hanged himself. Obiarika asks for help taking down Okonkwo's body because the Igbo believe that dying by suicide is an abomination and only strangers are allowed to handle the body and bury him. Obiarika gets in the face of the district commissioner and tells him that it's his fault for driving Okonkwo to kill himself, and now Okonkwo, who was this well-respected great man, is having to be buried like a dog. In response to this very passionate response from Obiarika, one of the messengers just tells him to shut up. And the district commissioner then tells the messengers to remove Okonkwo's body and bury him. And he notes that someone in his position should never do undignified tasks himself. So he's very detached and unemotional, whereas Obiarika was very emotional. The commissioner plans to write a book about his experiences bringing civilization to different parts of Africa. And he decides that this event with Okonkwo might be worth a paragraph or even a whole chapter, and that he's going to title his book The Pacification of the Primitive Tribes of the Lower Niger. And this is one of the excerpts we're going to take a look at in more detail, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time really analyzing this part here. It might seem like Okonkwo's death by suicide in particular is really anticlimactic, since he is this fierce warrior throughout the novel,